welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston, a congregation that welcomes you and extends a heartfelt invitation to join us in worship and in service to the world. We greet each of you, whether here in person or joining us online, and we're very glad you're with us today. Because of the uptick in coronavirus cases at this moment in the pandemic, we have temporarily suspended congregational singing. We are, however, excited to welcome our guest musicians, Teru Toda and Steve Buza, who will be sharing their gifts with us this morning. So please sit back, center yourselves, and enjoy our musical offerings. Let the first song of the morning stir a newness in our hearts. Let its contrast between notes and the space between sounds serve as a reminder that every chorus disappears into silence. In our lives, the thump of a heartbeat, the clod of shoes on stairs, riotous laughter, despairing wails, the sounds of vitality emerge from the silence of mystery and return to it again. This Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday, as the notes of the song fade into memory, let us be attuned to the mysteries that surround us. The mystery of joy, the mystery of sorrow, the mystery of justice, and yes, even the mysteries of pain or hatred, which can sometimes be overcome with love and compassion. Each mystery a new note that rings out, disappears, and rings again. This morning, this day, let that new note that we hear be one that calls us to our highest selves, to the mystery of beauty and the mystery of solidarity. And today, whatever it is that you are seeking, be it celebration or solace or some mixture of both, may you find it here in the all of the service, between sound and silence, silence and sound. Come, friends, let us worship together.
We invite you to recite the words in the order of service for the chalice lighting, and we'll do them in Spanish first, then English. Celebremos compartiendo nuestras vidas, enciendo esta luz. We kindle this light in celebration of the life we share.
Celebremos compartiendo nuestras vidas, encendiendo esta luz. By the waters of Babylon, where we sat us down and wept, when we remembered thee, O Zion.
Please join me in the spirit that some call prayer and others name meditation. Open yourself to the wonders and mysteries of the world. Open yourself to compassion and empathy. Take one breath. Take another. Center yourself. There is much difficulty in the world. The horrible events at Congregation Beth Israel, the Reformed Synagogue in the city of Colleyville, weigh on many of our hearts. A stark reminder that our world is infused with violence, and that even the places which should be safest, places like sanctuaries and schools, are not safe in a world gone mad. Even as we celebrate Dr. King, we are conscious of the difficulty of the world, and that it includes the crisis in our democracy, and the country feels divided between those who feel unashamed by white supremacy and those who struggle for different visions. We are conscious that the difficulty of the world includes the plight of undocumented migrants, that it includes the climate crisis, the global assault on democracy, rising inequality. Yet, even as we are conscious of all the injustices that we are called to announce, let us also be conscious of the beauty that surrounds us. It announces that the new society, the beloved community, is already with us, here. In the beauty of children, the beauty of flowers, the beauty of friends coming together to articulate a higher vision, and the beauty of this congregation, devoted as best we can be to the inherent worth and dignity of all people, whether it lies latent or realized within each human heart. That we may always remember to announce the beauty of the world, even as we denounce injustice. I invite the congregation to say, Amen. We pause now to lift up that which sits heavy and light on our hearts. We lift up Frank Liu Jr., who died at the beginning of the year, a friend of the Harvey Hornick family. We lift up prayers that we may open ourselves to see and enjoy the universe. I invite you now to speak or bring to mind the names of those you wish to be held in the loving embrace of this community. In this great cloud of witness and memory, amid this beloved community, we hear these names and hold them in our hearts. Let us extend our empathy to all of the suffering and joy amid our community that has not been named. Let us pause now in awe and wonder of the beauty, diversity, and mystery that is life. And so, in the spirit of hope, the spirit of compassion, I invite each of you to enter into a time of silent prayer, meditation, or reflection.
Each week, our morning offering is shared with an organization that shares our Unitarian Universalist values and through which we may live out our principles in the world. Today, our shared offering will go to support a worthy organization that, in its early years, officed from this very church, the Center for Healing and Racism. This organization, since 1989, has been facilitating the healing of racism through education and dialogue in a safe and supportive environment in order to empower individuals and transform communities. Those in our sanctuary will find the instructions for text giving in the order of service, and those watching the live stream will see the instructions on your stream. Our regular Sunday morning offering collection invites you to weave a tapestry of love in action. We ask you to give generously. An offering will now be gratefully received.
I invite you to read with me the words to dedicate our offering found in your order of service. To the work of this church, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives, and these are our offerings. Our first reading this morning is from Martin Luther King's sermon, America Too May Go to Hell. It was a sermon that he would have preached had he not been assassinated. And I come by here to say that America too is going to hell if we don't use her wealth. If America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty, to make life possible for all of God's children, to have the basic necessities of life, she too will go to hell. I will hear America through historians years and years to come saying, "We built gigantic buildings to kiss the sky. We built gargantuan bridges to span the seas. Through our spaceships, we were able to carve highways through the stratosphere. Through our airplanes, we were able to dwarf distance and place time in chains. Through our submarines, we were able to penetrate oceanic depths. But it seems that I can hear the God of the universe saying, even though you've done all of this, I was hungry, and you fed me not. I was naked, and ye clothed me not. The children of my sons and daughters were in need of economic security, and you didn't provide for them. So you cannot enter the kingdom of greatness." Here ends the reading.
The second reading, All About Love, New Visions, by Bell Hooks. Love redeems. Despite all the lovelessness that surrounds us, nothing has been able to block our longing for love, the intensity of our yearnings. The understanding that love redeems appears to be a resilient aspect of the heart's knowledge. The healing power of redemptive love lures us and calls us towards the possibility of healing. We cannot account for the presence of the heart's knowledge. Like all great mysteries, we are all mysteriously called to love, no matter the conditions of our lives, the degree of our depravity or despair. The persistence of this call gives us reason to hope. Without hope, we cannot return to love. Breaking our sense of isolation and opening up the window of opportunity, hope provides us with a reason to go forward. It is a practice of positive thinking. Renewing our faith in love's promise, hope is our covenant.
If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody he is traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. And my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain. If I can point somebody to the Lamb once slain, if I can tell somebody that he rose again, that he can cleanse the guilty, he can wash the slain, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian ought, if I can bring back beauty in a world upraught, if I can spread love's message that the Master thought, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. If I can help my path along, that my living shall not be in vain.
Struggling with revolutionary love. The title of my sermon can be read two ways. First, it is suggestive of the philosophy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He taught that the path to justice lay upon a foundation of revolutionary love. He sought to follow the wisdom of the one he called the Master, who, when he was crucified by hate, responded with aggressive love, who admonished his followers to love their enemies and to pray for them that despitefully used them, who instructed his disciples that it was only through creative love for their enemies that they could be children of their Father in heaven, and who beseeched them to remember that love and forgiveness were absolute necessities for spiritual maturity. Living by this wisdom, King believed, would allow the civil rights movement of his generation to overcome the obstacles of white supremacy, poverty, and war. It would empower workers in the vineyards of righteousness to raise their voices in a hymn not just of "we shall overcome," but eventually in "we have overcome." It would create a revolution of values that erased the glaring contrast between poverty and wealth, inspired politicians and generals to look at the world's dark and bloody battlefields and say of war, "This way of settling differences is not just," and prompt all people to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. This is the first interpretation of the sermon's title, that we who are seekers of justice are to proceed in our work rooted in revolutionary love. The second interpretation builds off the first. Rather, however, than suggesting that we are grounded in revolutionary love, it suggests that we are struggling with the very idea of revolutionary love itself. Instead of we, I suppose I should say I am struggling with the concept of revolutionary love. At this difficult and dangerous time in the history of this country, in this epoch of existential human crisis, I find myself genuinely uncertain about the belief that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends to justice. Uncertain that the way to bend it comes through following the edict of revolutionary love, or that the power to bend the arc is even rooted in love itself. What about you? Are you asking similar questions? Struggling with revolutionary love. I'm struggling with revolutionary love this morning because today it seems almost sacrilegious to speak of the man who Nina Simone named the King of Love. We're watching his legacy and the legacy of the civil rights movement be erased in the state of Texas and throughout the United States of America. We're watching his legacy be erased while politicians spew forth platitudes about the import of his life, the meaning of his philosophy, and the tragedy of his death. We're watching a national assault on voting rights by one of the major political parties, while, in the words of the journalist Robin Givenhan, King has become inspiration, retort, rallying cry, protective cover, the conservative rebuttal to concerns about systematic racism. King's name is a love song to bootstrapping individualism. In these times, it feels almost sacrilegious to offer another sermon celebrating the life of a man who preached an ethic of revolutionary love. And I have to admit that this week I seriously considered directing my remarks on Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday to another revolutionary or worker in the vineyards of righteousness. I thought maybe I should dedicate my words to Desmond Tutu, who spoke of how difficult it was during the dark days of apartheid's vicious awfulness, when evil seemed to be on a rampage and about to overcome goodness, to do anything more than hold on to faith by the skin of one's teeth. I considered celebrating the legacy of Sidney Poitier, devoted himself to creative cultural resistance to racism, and wrote, "I must find positive outlets for anger or it will destroy me." And that insight helped to inspire one of the most consequential and justice-making artistic careers of the last century. I even thought perhaps maybe the wisdom we needed today was from Workers for Justice, who criticized King's message of revolutionary love as insufficient. Ashada Shakur. Nobody has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of their oppressors. Or Kwame Ture. The first need of a free people is to define their own terms. Or quite possibly Malcolm X. That whole thing about appealing to the moral conscience of America. America's conscience is bankrupt. Uncle Sam has no conscience. Ultimately, though, I came back to King. I came back to King because these times are calling into question his faith in the belief that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I came back to him because these times are challenging any thought I might have about the power of revolutionary love being strong enough to inspire us to ultimately sing a hymn of "We have overcome." I came back to him because our Unitarian Universalist tradition, and therefore my faith, are closely connected to him, more so than we are connected to any of the others of the workers in the vineyards of righteousness who I have mentioned. King attended a Unitarian congregation in Boston for a time while he was in graduate school. And his faith in nonviolence was partially inspired by the Universalist minister Aidan Ballou. Ballou taught that by pledging never more to resist injury with injury, adhering to the law of love under all provocations, scrupulously suffering wrong, we shall gloriously overcome evil with good. Some of King's faith also came from the transcendentalist Henry David Thoreau, whose writings on civil disobedience helped inspire him to believe in the possibility of peaceful revolution. And his trust in the moral arc of the universe drew upon the Unitarian minister Theodore Parker, who preached, "I do not pretend to understand the moral arc of the universe. The arc is a long one, But from what I'm see, I'm sure it bends towards justice. And so when I speak of struggling with revolutionary love, I'm speaking of struggling with my own faith in some of the most influential teachings from the Unitarian Universalist tradition. I'm speaking of struggling with a belief that the democratic dimensions of the Republic will be preserved, that white supremacy will not be allowed to reassert itself, that the existential crisis of the hour will be addressed by the political class. I know that I'm not alone in such struggles. In the last months, I've spoken with many of you about your sense of foreboding doom. Many scholars and responsible journalists are claiming that the country's liberal democratic institutions are under profound threat. Members of one of the major political parties seem to have decided that fealty to a former president is more important than loyalty to the Constitution, or even, shockingly, the future of humanity. Their intransient refusal to address the climate catastrophe threatens not just the prosperity of those alive now, but the possibilities of future generations. Making the struggle more difficult, for me at least, is the knowledge that we've been this way before. It was Karl Marx who wrote, "All great world historic facts and personages appear twice. The first time as tragedy, the second time as farce." The farce seems to be with us. History is repeating itself. History is repeating itself. The voting rights and civil rights that Martin Luther King Jr. fought for had been won and lost by generations that had preceded him. They had been won during that great moment of democratic experimentation and upsurge and hope known as Reconstruction. Immediately following the Civil War, African American men gained the right to vote, to be tried by a jury of their peers, and to serve elected office. Between 1870 and 1900, more than 20 of them served in either the House or the Senate. History is repeating itself. This week is not the first time that the House has passed voting rights legislation only to see it rejected in the Senate. In 1890, as Jim Crow was being constructed here in Texas and across the South, and the right to vote was under assault, the House passed the Lodge Bill, which would have ensured federal oversight of elections and blocked laws limiting access to the ballot, only to see the bill filibustered in the Senate. The bill's failure emboldened white supremacists in their assault on the human rights of African Americans. It inspired a slew of legislation that made it all but impossible for black men to vote in the former states of the Confederacy. The first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. It's farcical to listen to a senator from Arizona speak of how she is for voting rights, but wants to preserve the filibuster because somehow getting rid of it would somehow worsen the underlying disease of division infecting the country. She should know what will come next. Without voting rights legislation, the disease of minority rule, the disease of white supremacy, the true ailment that has long animated the opposite of the better angels of our nature, will grow more virulent. The first time is tragedy. The second time is farce. It is farcical to watch a senator from West Virginia support abolishing the filibuster for removing the debt ceiling, while refusing to abolish it to preserve a fundamental citizenship right. And it's farcical to hear a senator from Kentucky make pious proclamations that the president is profoundly unpresidential, while he keeps his caucus firmly committed to blocking vital legislation. The first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. It is the farcical nature of the situation that has left me struggling with revolutionary love. What about you? Revolutionary love requires faith. Faith, Paul writes in Hebrews, is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It is trust that despite evidence to the contrary, as Desmond Tutu liked to say, this is God's world and God's in charge. It is a belief that no matter how difficult the hour, if we just keep on keeping on, everything's going to be all right. And it's difficult to keep that faith now. It's difficult to keep as we find ourselves almost 2 years into a pandemic that seems like it will never end. As we experience over and over again the failures of the political class to provide the country, nay, humanity, what the world needs. As economic uncertainty, political division, and the resurgence of white supremacy and the daily death toll of thousands mount. It makes it all seem like what lies ahead is not the arc of the moral universe bending towards justice, but only more tragedy. Throughout his life, King struggled with such a faith and revolutionary love. His last words may have been, God's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. But his last sermon, the one he drafted but never got to deliver because he was tragically assassinated, was titled, America Too is Going to Hell. King never gave the sermon, and as a result, there's an alternative title that exists that's a little softer, America May Go to Hell. But whatever title you pick, which is really one of those historians' quibbles, the words of the sermon are the words of someone who is struggling with his faith. They're the words of a worker in the vineyard of righteousness who is trying to find evidence of things unseen and having an awfully hard time finding it. The words of a man who is speaking like a prophet and denouncing a country that will spend billions on a physical infrastructure bill, but do little to meet the ongoing needs of the poor. They're words of a man who wonders what will happen to his beloved country if it does not change its course. Struggling with revolutionary love. From everything I know of his biography, I suspect that King struggled with revolutionary love in much the same way that many of us do. I suspect that he wondered whether it had the actual capacity to transform the world and bend the arc of the moral universe. In his last year, he spoke more and more blisteringly about the wickedness of the United States. In one sermon, he denounced the war in Vietnam and said, "It's just as easy to kill Vietnamese as it is to kill Americans, because they're all God's children." Struggling with revolutionary love. These last months, I've been questioning whether or not revolutionary love provides the path forward. And as I've been doing that, I've been thinking about the nature of faith. What if, I've asked myself, rather than thinking of faith as evidence of things not seen, we recast it as evidence of things seen? The prophetic impulse has long been generated by the tension between what ought to be and what is. The faithful prophet demands the world be improved according to their vision of justice. They denounce what is lacking and proclaim what should be. The challenge is that the world is always lacking what it should be. The challenge is that when I watch senators from Arizona, West Virginia, and Kentucky, I am struck by the distance between what is and what ought to be. The problem is that to imagine right now that the country and the human species are bending towards justice does not require just faith in evidence in things not seen. It requires an almost willful blindness. I cry most days now, the British environmental journalist George Monbiot wrote of our present situation. Perhaps that is what is required. Certainly today, in these times, we need to make room for grief. But I have come to another realization as I have struggled with revolutionary love. I think that a definition of faith that relies upon evidence of things not seen is wrong. What if we reimagine faith as evidence of things seen? I suspect that the challenge we face is not to bring the things that are unseen into the world. It is to build upon the goodness that already exists. The faith I have in the democratic process and practice comes not from things not seen. It comes from my experience over the years watching Unitarian Universalist congregations like this one engage in the work of self-governance, the thoughtful conversations I've had with board members and team leaders and religious educators about how Unitarian Universalists can perform the difficult task of forming a religious community that embodies our values. My faith in the democratic practice comes not from the Senate in the unseen passage of much-needed legislation. It comes from all the people I've known, and I have known so many, who have gathered week by week to improve their communities, to build their labor unions, to cooperate together. It's found in people who are willing, as Martin Luther King Jr. was, to commit civil disobedience and strive with all their might for justice. The evidence in things seen. The farce of history might be repeating itself, but we can have faith that past tyrants have been defeated. The Confederacy lost the Civil War. Jim Crow was undone. I imagine that King found his faith in revolutionary love from a similar place. Now, it's true that he often spoke of the inspiration he found in Jesus, but I believe that it is also true that he found hope for revolutionary love in the love of the ordinary people that surrounded him. We often lift him up as a solitary prophet. In truth, he was the spokesperson for a movement who grounded himself in love he had for his fellow workers in the vineyards of righteousness, far more than he did in any sense of divine love. It's all there in his sermons. Go read that famous last speech, the one he gave on the last night of his life, the one he ends by telling us that he's been to the mountaintop and can see the promised land. Do you know how it begins? It doesn't begin with a scriptural citation or an inspiring quote. It begins with a tribute to his friend Ralph Abernathy, the best friend I have in the world. And what is a sermon about? I mean, what is it really about? When you read it closely, you find that an awful lot of the sermon focuses on one thing. It's about the profound inspiration, the profound experience of revolutionary love King had experienced from those he had spent so many years working alongside. There are words of inspiration he draws from those who have been with him in the struggle for many years, who've been to jail for struggling, but still going on, still fighting for the rights of the people. I get the sense that the sermon is less about faith in things unseen than in faith in things seen. King has faith in revolutionary love because he has felt its presence in his life throughout his time in the civil rights movement. Revolutionary love, I want to suggest, is less about the ought, how the world ought to be, and more about the is, the love King had for his community and the love his community had for him. The question is not how to bring the unseen into being. It is how to lure more of the goodness that already exists into existence. This is why Bell Hooks, in her own reflections on revolutionary love, can claim, "Love redeems." We are each born with a fundamental need for love. When we find the love we seek in community, in friendship, in our family, in a romantic partner, we discover reason to hope. The revolutionary love we seek, Hooks taught and King experienced, begins in our everyday relationships and in our communities. Struggling with revolutionary love. Here is where I would like to leave the sermon. We can find so much of the power of love that we seek in the same place that King found it. It is in and amongst ourselves, growing in our hearts when we gather together to struggle for justice, to care for each other, and to care for the world. May it grow ever stronger in this hour. Amen, Ashe, and blessed be.
We shall overcome, we shall overcome, we shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand, we'll walk hand in hand, we'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we'll walk hand in hand someday. We shall all be free, we shall all be free, we shall all be free someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall all be free someday. We shall live in peace, we shall live in peace, we shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall live in peace someday.
Please join with me in reciting the words in our order of service for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I close with the final words from Martin Luther King Jr.'s last sermon, the one he never had an opportunity to preach. He simply said, "Walk together, children." Let us listen and together learn to love each other and hold each other so that we might find in our ordinary experiences the power of revolutionary love. Amen. Thank you so much for watching our service today. We're glad you are part of our online community. We welcome people who are diverse in faith, ethnicity, history, as well as gender identity and sexual orientation. There are so many ways where you can get involved in our community, and one you can do right now is by clicking on the like below or subscribing to our channel. Thanks for joining us.